Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Hello everyone, welcome to our video. We are from group 3 of the philosophical basis of TFL methodology. And we will present about the material which is teaching by principles. But before we start, I will introduce our member first. Start for me, I'm Ade Siti Khodijah and
I'm Anita Zukhrufa.
And then
Hello, my name is Ardi.
The first material will be delivered by Anita Zukhrufa.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. I'm Anita Zukhrufa and I'm going to explain about cognitive principle. It's related on mental and intellectual function. In cognitive principle, it consists of 5 kind of principle. The first principle is automaticity principle. It's about efficiency of language learning that both adults and children must sooner or later move away from processing language unit by unit, piece by piece, and keep focusing on each of them without over-analyzing the language and without overthinking about the language form. The second principle is meaningful learning. In meaningful learning is about subsume new information into existing structure and memory system, and it can create stronger retention. And for children, they are good meaningful acquire of language because they connecting sound, word, structure, and discourse element with that which is relevant and important in their daily case of knowledge and survival. There are some classroom implications of principle of meaningful learning, such as capitalize the power of meaningful learning by relating to student interests and student goals. And also, if there are new topic or new concept, try to think about if the student know about that kind of topic, and then try to avoid like too much explanation, like too much grammar explanation, too much abstract principle or theory or something like that. The third principle is the anticipation of reward. Human beings are universally driven to act or behave by anticipation of reward. For example, when teacher gives student rewards such as praising them or give them appropriate score, appropriate grade, it will help students to see clearly what they are doing, and it can more motivate them by the reward that they get from teacher. But it still have shortcoming, like it can lead learner to become depend on short-term reward, and it will make they have habit of looking to teacher or other people reward. As a teacher, we can give the learner praise or encouragement just for keep their confidence about their ability, and then we can encourage the student to reward each other with compliment or supportive action. The fourth principle is intrinsic motivation, and as we know that the most powerful reward are those that intrinsically motivate within the learner, because the behavior stem from need, want, or desire within the oneself. The behavior itself as self-rewarding. And for example, when learner perform some text because it is fun, it is interesting, useful, or challenging, not because they anticipating reward from teacher, it will help them mastery the language learning itself. And for classroom technique itself, it will be successful if the student or learner have strong intrinsic motivation. The fifth principle is strategic investment. Successful mastery of language learning comes from students themselves, and it's from of their investment of time, effort, and attention for language learning. And as we know that learner also use various strategies to send and receive language, and one student strategy for success may be very different for another student. So therefore, the varieties of teaching techniques that we know it's really important for students because as we know that each student has different learning strategy and principle of strategic investment. Nevertheless, it's a reminder to provide as much attention as you can to each student. For example, you know that when you know that there are 3/4 of your student in a class prefer to do individual work, but we cannot make it as a reference for all classroom activity because we have to balance the diversity of learning method with student learning style. So I think that's all that I can explain about cognitive principles. The next principle will be explained by Ade Siti.
Okay, now I will explain about affective principles. In these principles, here we look about feelings about self, about relationship and a community of learners, and about the emotional ties between language and culture. Language ego can be summarized in a well-recognized claim as human beings learn to use a second language, they also develop a new mode of thinking and acting a second of identity. The new language ego, intertwined with the second language, can easily create within the learner a sense of fragility, a defensiveness, and a raising of inhibitions. In other words, in learning the language as a second language, surely those who learn it will feel like many obstacles because they feel this is a foreign language for them. And we as a language teachers, we must overcome it. Here are some solutions for dealing with students who learn English as a second language. First, the need for empathy for learners who feel less confident in learning English. And second, on a more mechanical lesson planning level, your choice of techniques and sequence of techniques needs to be cognitively challenging but not overwhelming at an effective level. Third, consider the condition of the learner's language egos such as when to correct and then planning an activity and in organizing groups. And last, if the learners learn English in an environment that uses English or the main language, we must provide an understanding that gives confidence to the learners. And the next is Principle 7 about self-confidence. And for some application to make learners for more confidence in learning and can follow the lesson, first, give ample verbal and non-verbal assurance to student. It's really help a student to hear a teacher affirm a belief in student ability. And the second is sequence techniques from easier to more difficult. As a teacher, we are called on sustained self-confidence where it already exists and to build it in it where it doesn't. And the next principle is about risk-taking. And the principle for reflect the classroom of risk-taking is first, create an atmosphere in the classroom that encourages students to try out language, to venture a response, and not to wait for someone else to volunteer language. And second, provide reasonable challenge in your techniques. Make them neither too easy nor too hard. And third, help your student for understand what conclude the task the risk taking is, and let some feel that they must burn out any old response. And last, respond to student risky attempts with positive affirmation, appraising them to trying while at the same time warmly but firmly attending in their language. And the next principle is about language-culture connection. Whenever you teach language, you also teach a complex system of cultures, custom of course, and values and ways of thinking, feelings, and acting. The aspect of this principle may be summed up in this way. That is, especially in second language learning contexts, the success with which learners adapt to a new cultural milieu will affect their language acquisition success, and vice versa in some possibly significant ways. And for some application, we ask a teachers. This classroom application include the following. The first, discuss cross-cultural difference with other student, and then the second is include among your techniques certain activities and materials that illustrate the connection between language and culture. And third, teach your students the cultural connections. And fourth, screen your techniques for materials that may be culturally offensive. And last, make explicit to your student what you might take for granted in your own culture. Okay, that's all for me. And the next material will be delivered by Ardi.
Okay, the next material is linguistic principles. The first principle of this material is the native language effect. Most of the time, we think of the native language of exercising an interfering effect on the target language, and indeed it does. The majority of a learner's error in producing the second language, especially in the beginning levels, stem from the learner's assumption that the target operates like the native language. The principle of the native language effect stresses the importance of that native system in the linguistic attempts of the second language learner. Some classroom suggestions stemming from the native language effect. Regard learner's error and provide appropriate feedback. Errors of native language interference may be repaired by acquainting the learner with the native language cause of the error. Ideally, every successful learner will hold on to the facilitating effects of the native language and discard the interference. Thinking directly in the target language usually helps to minimize interference errors. The next principle is interlanguage. The interlanguage principle tells us second language learners tend to go through the systematic or quasi-systematic developmental process as they progress to full competence in the target language. Successful interlanguage development is partially a result of utilizing feedback from others. The collective experience of language teachers of second language research indicates that classroom instruction makes a significant difference in the speed and success with which learners proceed through interlanguage stage of development. However, a number of general classroom implications deserve attention. Teachers need to exercise some tolerance for certain interlanguage forms that may arise out of students' logical development process. The first is try to get students to self-correct select errors. The ability to self-correct may indicate readiness to use that form correctly and regularly. The next is in your feedback on students' linguistic output. Make sure that you provide sample effective feedback, or verbal or non-verbal, to encourage them to speak. The next principle is communicative competence. While communicative competence has come to capture multiplicity of meanings depending on who you ask, communicative competence provides what is perhaps the most important linguistic principle of learning and teaching. Given that communicative competence is the goal of language classroom, instruction need to point toward all its components: organizational, pragmatic, strategic, and psychomotor. Communicative goals are best achieved by giving due attention to language use and not just usage, to fluency and not just accuracy, to authentic language and context. And so students eventually need to apply classroom learning to previously unrehearsed context in the real world. For the last, consider these following classroom teaching rules that might emerge. The first is, remember that grammatical explanation or exercise are only part of a lesson. Okay, and the second one is, make sure that your students have opportunities to gain some fluency in English without having to be constantly wary of little mistakes. Okay, the last is, try to keep every technique that you use as authentic as possible. Okay, that's all from us, from me especially. Thank you for attention and watching. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi.
Okay, that's all from us. Thank you for watching and wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. See you.